All right, guys. Hey, welcome to the show. Back for another episode. Before we get started, I just want to say, because we don't run ads, we only have one fee, and that's if you learn something. Enjoy the show. Just share it. Leave us a rating on whatever platform that you're listening to or watching on. But today, our guest is Ernie Garcia. He is a lawyer out of Houston. Focuses on landlords. It's got a lot of great information, especially if you're a landlord. There's evictions are popular and a few other things, and he has a Facebook group as well. So lots of experience. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over and hear a little bit let Ernie tell him about himself and how he got started. So take it away, Ernie. How'd you get everything started? Tell us about you.
So you want me to go back to the very beginning?
Sure.
Well, I guess my mom and dad were dating, and let's not go that far back. So I actually started off in Houston. I went to the University of Houston, go Cougies.
Okay.
And I graduated and went immediately after that into public education. I was a teacher for 6 years, both in HISD and then in Spring ISD where I lived. And I got that itch. I wanted to go back to school and actually considered medical school first. But it didn't take long and too many episodes of ER for me to realize that's just not my bag. People are kind of gross, and I didn't want to deal with any of that stuff. So law school was it. I submitted some applications. I took the LSAT, and in 2006 I was accepted into South Texas College of Law, and bada bing, bada boom. And so that's how I got into law school. It wasn't like a lifelong plan or anything. I feel like I kind of backed into law school, but I've loved the ride ever since, and really enjoyed real estate law and what it's taught me about the industry, about the dynamics in real estate itself, and what's going on, both in Houston and all across the country. And so it's just every year it's something new. As things are just constantly in flux.
What piqued your interest on real estate? Because I know obviously once you get out of law school, you can go all sorts of directions, right? You can go this way, that way. What made you go into real estate and then particularly go into landlord law, like really spend time on that area?
Well, I'll tell you that, coming out of law school, if you're not going big law, and I graduated in 2009 in the middle of the recession. And so nobody was hiring, it was really tough to get a gig with an established firm. So the next thing you do is you hang your shingle and you say, I'm going to represent clients on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody does criminal or immigration or family law. And I just wasn't interested in that. Personal injury, these are the big four that everybody goes into. I was interested in doing something different, particularly somewhere where people just weren't being represented, and it just turned out that landlord tenant law was one of those places, and I think it's that way because these cases just go so fast that most people don't even think about hiring counsel, and so I started out actually representing tenants in these cases. I figured, well, there's a market there. Nobody's advertising to them, and so I went straight to soliciting cases for tenant representation. And that's really how I cut my teeth and learned the law and learned what the courts, do and do not want. And then after a couple of years, I flipped sides, and now I predominantly represent landlords in all sorts of landlord cases.
What made you flip sides? Anything particular that made you just go, let me move to landlord law versus tenant?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, to get tenant clients, I mean, you have to go through a ton of potential clients before you get to an actual serious client who's willing to hire you and go the distance with the case. And then in terms of repeat clientele, that's definitely better with landlords, because if you got a repeat tenant in an eviction matter, they just don't know how to pay the rent. And so if they can't pay the rent, they're probably not going to pay their legal bills. And so it was an easy evolution, because once I understood the law and what it took to win cases, it was very easy then to take that expertise and tell landlords. In fact, more than once, I would be at trial against the landlord, and then that landlord would say, "Hey, can I have your business card?"
That's great.
Sure, I can't help you on this case, but anything else, I'll be happy to help you. And so that's kind of how that metamorphosis took place.
So if you had a repeat tenant client, the judge is like, Mr. Garcia, I think it's time to let him go.
I'll tell you, that happened on a couple of occasions. Where we're back, Judge. This landlord still doesn't got it, and we're going to slap him around a little bit more. Maybe he'll get the hint, and he'll hire me for the next one. But who knows?
Man, that's funny. So it just started out with tenants, and then eventually landlords are just asking you, "Hey, man, you were on it. Can we hire you instead and not have to?"
Yeah, that was kind of the slow trickle at first. And so the other way that I sought out landlords was through solicitation.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the legal practice, you are allowed to send out, a letter to people who are involved in a lawsuit. And so you can send out some basic advertising saying, "Hey, you've got a case in such and such court. I'd like to, if you're interested, you can give me a call. I'd like to talk to you, see if there's maybe something we can do to assist you."
Yeah.
And so you send out thousands of letters, every month, and you get a few bites, and people will call you and say, "Well, what can you do that, differently than I'm already doing? I do a ton of these all the time. What can you offer?" And so you get your foot in the door and you talk to landlords,
mm-hmm.
and you talk to them about maybe the weaknesses of their case or how you can use your expertise to get them out of a jam. Typically, we get calls from people who are like at wit's end. They don't know what to do because they only have a limited understanding of the law. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we step in and we can be a real asset to landlords.
So
but yeah, it was as simple as just getting my name out there. The Facebook group and my YouTube channel it really were the seeds to that just explosion in the Houston area, though.
Yeah. I mean, dude, we've even just as landlords ourselves. I mean, it's Misty and I both are like, man, he's got great stuff, and that's why I wanted to reach out. I reached out to you. I was like, I know he's got great stuff and knows what he's doing. So, I got to ask this: like, crazy tenant stories. Have you had any like wild cases that you've come across? And you're like, man, this is bananas. And whether or a tenant or maybe just like a horrible landlord, like it was on the landlord side or whatnot. What do you say? Some that really stick out for you?
Hey, well, I'll go back to actually my very first eviction matter. It's funny that it started off that way because I thought, whoa, if this is what landlord-tenant law looks like, this is going to be a wild, wild ride. So my very first one, I actually was not, really even considering eviction representation. But a woman comes into my office and says, "Look, I've been locked out of my unit. I went on vacation. I took my kids to the beach. Yeah, I was having trouble paying my rent, but I come back, I'm locked out. I go to my landlord and she is not letting me in." I said, "Ooh, that sounds tough." I said, "So you haven't paid your rent?" She says, "Nope. But I don't know what to do. I'm living in a hotel. I can't get my kids clothing. I had to go to Walmart and buy stuff so they could go to school the next day. What can you do to help me?" I thought, I'll see what I can do. And so I crack open the Texas Property Code and start reading through it. And man, I'm finding some nuggets in there. Mm-hmm. So this is back, it's got to be over 10 years ago. And so I file a response into the lawsuit. We know we're set for trial later that week. So I file a response and I file a counterclaim. Totally illegal. There is no such thing as a counterclaim in an eviction, but I actually didn't know that. And the court didn't stop me. I filed it and nobody batted an eye. We set it for trial. And I show up and we're there at the courtroom, and it turns out that the landlord is an attorney. So there I am just sweating. Like I already don't know what I'm doing, and now I'm going up against an attorney. First eviction. So I said, what the heck? I prepped. I know the facts, and maybe I'm going to find a sympathetic ear. But what I didn't know was that I was in front of probably at the time the most pro-landlord judge on the bench in Harris County.
Oh man,
and he's since passed on, and over the years he and I developed a pretty good relationship in his courtroom. But that was my first one in front of him, and I won't disclose his name or the court. But there we were, and so the case starts going, and I start presenting my defense, and I say, Your Honor, the property code clearly says this is an illegal lockout. The landlord does not have the right to forbid my client from entering, even if she hasn't paid rent. She didn't give proper notice, and she didn't make a key available 24 hours a day, is what the Texas property code still says. Even if the tenant has failed to pay rent, which I think is the stupidest rule in the Texas property code, but it's there. You can lock out a residential tenant, but you have to make a key available to them 24 hours a day. She didn't do that, and so she was in violation. And the code cited all these provisions where the tenant could, counterclaim and not counterclaim, but could assert a claim. Well, what this attorney didn't know, because she wasn't a real estate attorney, she was a probate attorney. What she didn't know was, man, there was nothing legal about my counterclaim, and really, this did not serve as a legitimate defense. See, I know this now after years and years.
Yeah.
She didn't know it. Instead, so she didn't go procedurally and attack my case. Instead, she dug into her briefcase and pulled out what she thought was the most damaging piece of evidence she was going to present. And it was, but it didn't do the damage she thought it would.
Mm-hmm.
She pulls out a full 8x10 photograph and lays it on the judge's bench. Now, this is the first time I'd seen it. She didn't say anything about it pre-trial. So there I am looking at it, and lo and behold, again, 8x10 full color is a device that she found. And here's what she said. She said, Your Honor, I do not want this woman on my property. I went into her room while she was out, and it didn't take long for me to find this feminine device. She took a picture of it and showed it to the judge. It was a pink massager.
Oh.
And the judge's face, this guy's like 150 years old, his face goes blood red. And I think at first she thought, oh, he's incensed. How dare she have this item in my home? Instead, he looks right at her and says, you take that picture off my bench. How dare you go and invade someone's privacy? And after that, it was over. It didn't matter how procedurally inappropriate he was just doling out money. He said, I'm awarding this, and I'm awarding this, and I'm awarding this. Your eviction is canceled, and you're going to pay all of her attorney fees.
Man.
And we walked out, and that woman was shocked that things went so terribly for her. But yeah, don't take photographs of people's private stuff. It's not going to work.
That attorney had the most damaging picture they'd ever had in their life.
Yeah. It just blew up right in her face. It was, and I couldn't believe it. And I'll tell you, I was shaking the whole time. At one point, I was trying to prove my case, and I said, Your Honor, this is in the property code. Everything I'm saying, boom, boom, boom. The judge literally takes his copy of the property code off his desk, and he tosses it at me. Now, this is before I was winning the case. This is before the pink massager. He takes his copy and he tosses it at me, and I catch it, and he says, find it. So there, I had just read it for the first time the day before. And so there I am thumbing through his copy of the code, which is not, it was a totally different book than mine. So there I am looking at it, and in the middle of her spiel, I find it and I present it to the court. But yeah, he wasn't making it easy on me until the photograph. Full size.
They're like, I got the most devastating evidence right here for my own case. That's awesome.
It was a bomb.
It sounds like something that seems to be the common theme. It's an entrepreneurial thing. It sounds like you really had to learn things on your own and figure it out. Would you say that's the case? Once you opened up, you're like, I'm gonna work with different clients, and you start, because you pretty much took on your own clients from the beginning, and then didn't work at a big firm. You're like, you built this from scratch,
right. But
you're learning this as you go, right? I mean, that's pretty much how we had to trial by fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you know something well enough, that, there really isn't much more to learn.
Mm-hmm.
You develop that expert status.
Yeah.
So I know landlord tenant law on the tenant side. I know it on the landlord side well enough that I can represent either and successfully go and present a case, and talk about the kinds of things, the kinds of defenses, or the kinds of pitfalls that most people just don't consider because they do it over and over and over. And maybe these judges, 90% of these judges will never find a problem here, but we know that when you get on appeal and you go to a different level of court practice, those judges are going to catch you every time and send you back to start the whole thing over.
Yeah.
And so many landlords are unaware of these pitfalls. And so it helps to have somebody who's done it hundreds of times and who's counseled hundreds of landlords and said, nope, this isn't going to work. And I'll tell you exactly why. And yeah, it's just like you said, trial by fire, over and over.
Yeah, I have such appreciation when I hear stuff like that, and because I know that's we're the same way. We've had to learn things as we go. It's just you got to figure it out. To hear you say like, hey, I went from out of law school to going, there's not a lot of jobs. I'm just gonna do this on my own and figure it out. To me, that's a great appreciation. That's pretty much how we operate too. I love that. I got to ask on the you're talking about kind of moving up the ladder of the courts. Is it often that landlords are having to deal with that they go from, here and then they go to appeal, and, is that common, or is it usually stop right there on the very first?
Yeah, I'd say about 75% of evictions stop at the justice court.
Yeah.
Because the truth just is that while there are many tenants, many tenants who are learning their rights and who are getting all sorts of assistance, especially post-pandemic. Mm-hmm. There was a season where like every tenant was getting free legal advice or free counsel. And man, it was tough for landlords because they were just getting bamboozled because they don't know the law, they don't know procedure. And so, our phones are just ringing off the hook because they were going to what was commonly an easy win and just getting turned around by the courts. But even so, even past all that season is essentially over. Most landlords are pretty successful in the justice court by themselves. It's on appeal. It's those 25% that move up mm-hmm. that can be a real challenge for landlords because the procedure is different, the requirements are different, and the judges are different. Depending on which county you're on, you might have a very tenant-friendly justice court, but you get up to the county level and you might find the exact opposite, a very landlord-friendly, or vice versa. And so your approach changes based on where you are and what you're likely to prove.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the common things you see with landlords that they just make mistakes? Like, what's some of the most common mistakes you see that whether it be eviction or not eviction or other situations you've come across that you're just like, man, this happens all the time. These guys got to get it together.
I think easily the most common mistake that landlords make is, especially new landlords, mm-hmm. right? Seasoned vets, they probably have, taken a few lumps and so they don't do this one anymore. But particularly young, brand new landlords skip screening. Or they don't do a thorough enough job screening their tenants. Yeah. That they essentially invite what used to be somebody else's problem right into their home. Yeah. And that step alone, I think, would eliminate half of landlord problems. If you screened more diligently, you wouldn't have nearly the number of evictions that you have. Most evictions could be prevented with adequate screening.
That's the excitement of the money. You're like, we're new. Mm-hmm. We I'm not gonna lie, we got lured into that one time. We actually talked about it on the podcast that they pay us like $7,000 up front, and I was like, oh yeah, this is when we started. This is 2012 or so, 13, and we're like so excited. We'd been landlords for a little bit, but we got lucky, and then somebody paid us $7,000 up front and had bad credit, and we didn't realize that. Well, you got to give all that
for a divorce and paid 6 months up front.
You got to get all that back whenever you want to get them out. We didn't know those things, right? We used a property management company at the time, and she ripped all the carpet out. I'm like,
Yeesh. Yeah, or the reason they have so much money saved up is because they haven't been paying their last landlord for the last 6
Mm-hmm.
that's
Right.
probably that's probably what it was. But I remember because so we own a jiu-jitsu academy, and so I remember teaching the kids, teaching class, and Misty's like, "Hey, they're gonna pay $7,000." I was like, "Sold, just take it." I didn't know. I had no idea.
And it's one of those lessons that you'll never forget.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never forget, but yeah, and so that simple step that, don't just let anybody through the door.
Yeah.
If you're a proper gatekeeper, you say, look, I've got a think of it like dad picking out his daughter's prom date.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Dad's going to have a super high step. The fact that he's allowing his daughter to go to prom at all is one thing. All right, that's a big step for dad. But if you're going to take my daughter, here is the list of criteria. And think about dad saying, well, he smokes a little bit, and he's got, he's got tracks on his arm.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a couple, right? And is that a stolen car? Okay. Dads wouldn't normally, let any of that stuff slide. He's going to be like a hawk, right?
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, we don't have that same hawk mentality when we let people onto our rental property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because of it, we get burned.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes a squirrely-looking kid ends up being okay, and nothing happens at prom. But why take that chance if you can go through that screening criteria with every possible applicant and weed out the bad ones? Again, half your problems gone.
It's the excitement of the money. That's what it is. If the kid was like, "Hey, Dad, I'll give you $7,000," just ignore me.
Or they feel bad and can kind of see what happened and understand and know where they're coming from and try to give a second chance.
Yeah. Yes. A lot of what I deal with is that guilt.
Mm-hmm.
That, well, I feel bad. I want to cut the guy a break. And so I did this whole session in August. I talked to a group of investors that I called "Nice Landlords Finish Broke."
And that's true.
It is true. It's this idea that, well, I how can I send this notice to vacate? That's not nice, right? Or how can I charge late fees? Oh, that's not what nice people do, right?
Yeah.
What would Jesus do?
Charge late fees.
Well, he probably wouldn't be in the landlord-tenant business.
No.
But that's what I tell him. I said, don't think about this in terms of Jesus. You're mixing things up.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mix religion and business. That never works.
Yeah.
Right. If you try to use religious principles in a business setting, you're kind of mixing ideas that really don't go together, right?
Yep.
Because you don't have a business transaction with your, in your religious practice, right? Nor should you have religious transactions in your business practice. And so, I constantly try to correct this language in landlords and tell them, look, it's not about being nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being clear and consistent, right? If your lease clearly states out your expectations and you carry them out and you adhere to your own obligations clearly and consistently, then hold them to theirs.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I like that. You're absolutely right. Nice landlords finish broke. You all in the Facebook groups and just, you kind of network and stuff, you start seeing that. You're like, man, they got to enforce that, because if they don't, you're absolutely right. They're going to end up broke. And that's the best way to put it. I've ever heard that. Nice landlords end up broke.
They get taken advantage of.
Taken advantage of. In fact, you just came across one that somebody had living out of their car. You feel bad for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're like, they live out of their car. What was the scenario? They're going through a divorce, or
domestic
violence and stuff. And you're like, you want to help, but you're going, man, I know if I place this person, I'm going to be unplacing this person probably. And
right. It's like you gotta hear that alarm bell, because it's ringing, man.
Yeah.
Somebody living out of a car, that means that they had to get out of a situation fast. And despite what they're telling you,
mm-hmm.
you may be getting a half truth. You may be getting 1/8 of the truth.
Yeah.
Right. right? The 7/8 of the rest of that story could be quite well. Okay, so I didn't pay my rent for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I set the kitchen on fire. You should have seen it.
Something tells me he's heard the kitchen on fire a few times. Well, that's kind of what happened, right? When Misty, as you were screening them, the story changed, right? It was over and over.
Well, just more stuff came up.
More
criminal background.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
bad credit.
Yeah, you're digging in, but you're like, it's not working out. Yeah, you do feel bad for him.
You do, and what I tell landlords during the screening process is when they're coming to you with their best face, right? It's like a job interview. You dress up, and it's like, yep, this is the best. I get worse from here. It's all downhill from here. This is the best me, and if the best version of them is that, they're telling you. They are, you don't need a crystal ball. They are flat out telling you, I'm already a bad candidate. And the more you dig, you're going to find more evidence of that. You pass them by and say, I wish you the best of luck. But this is a business move, and I'm gonna make a business decision.
Yeah. I want to ask this: did you ever come across? So Misty and I talk about this sometimes because we feel like as landlords, our responsibility is to provide. Obviously, is to provide a nice place to live. We're not talking about if it's not the Ritz, it's not the Ritz, but everything needs to be working, it needs to be nice, it needs to be kept up. But some landlords, the slumlords, bug us. That have you come across that just working with tenants where they don't fix anything, they don't care. It's just, you're like, man, it's they literally, you feel bad for whoever ends up living in that person's property. Did you come across that a lot working, throughout the year? Certain landlords are like, these guys just don't need to be in the business.
So I'll tell you, typically people who are slumlords and won't pay a plumber to go fix a toilet and won't pay, somebody to go, fix the electrical problems that are wrong, usually also won't pay an attorney to represent them.
Yeah.
That's just the way of it.
Yeah.
What I do hear a lot is people who haven't paid their rent for 6 months and they accuse their landlords of being a slumlord.
Right.
Right? They say, well, there's this problem and this problem and this problem and this problem. And although the lease says, look, you're asking for cosmetic repairs or things that don't rise to the level of a absolutely have to fix.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there's a clause in your lease that says if you haven't paid rent, you can't demand these repairs.
Right.
So that's one. Mm-hmm. Number two, if it's so terrible, why are you still there?
Yeah.
You were demanded to leave in writing, and you're stuck around. So what you're saying is illogical. I don't know how many times, I've shown up to an eviction court and someone says, Your Honor, I live in absolute filth, but I'm fighting to stay here. And the judge will ask them, well, why haven't you left? Well, I've got no place else to go. Yeah. Or it's hard to find a place to live for free. Right? Yeah, that is so true. It is so true. And so, I kind of take these descriptions with a grain of salt. Could landlords do better? I always advocate for, putting out an excellent product.
Right.
If you're going to lease property, you should put out an excellent product. Now, excellence looks different to different people, right? It looks different in different markets, right? Would you take a $600 a month rental and put marble countertops in there? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? But are you going to put quality stuff in there that actually functions? You should, and you shouldn't neglect people because they are of lesser means. Your property should be presentable, like you're going to market it for sale, at least at the beginning of the tenancy. If a tenant does any harm to it, then stand on your rights. Get rid of them. Notice of default. Notice to vacate. Get rid of them if that's actually happening. If you've got good rent-paying tenants, yeah, you should maintain the quality of the property and keep it up. Don't let things fall into disrepair. That harms, and number one, your brand as a business person. But number two, it harms your property.
Yeah. What's the longest you've ever seen someone be able to, or the longest eviction you've come across where you're like, man, these people have been here forever before they even, whether they were there when the process started forever or it just took forever for whatever reason. What was the?
So I've had evictions that have run beyond a year.
Yeah.
And those can get complicated for a couple of reasons. Usually, I'll tell you the ones that go the absolute longest are not the typical landlord tenant stuff. Sometimes there's issues having to do with a rightful claim of ownership, and when you have these either provisions in a really bad lease, or you have facts that kind of lend toward that, it makes the eviction complicated. I'll tell you, whenever you have a lease with a legit landlord and a legit tenant, and it's straight non-payment, those wrap up usually pretty quickly. But these ones where it appears that maybe the parties were trying to convey title, or you have a contract for deed, and part of the contract talks about a landlord-tenant relationship, but part of it talks about a buyer-seller relationship. Those are just bad contracts to argue. Half the time the court loses jurisdiction, and you can't proceed with an eviction. You got to go into another court. So I would say that straight leases tend to be pretty clean evictions. It's where you start getting messy with talk about conveyance that things go off the rails.
Lease to own kind of stuff.
Options to buy.
Yeah, option to buy, pay up front.
All that garbage. I tell landlords to just stay away from that. Somebody wants to buy your house, have them put an offer, right? Don't throw it into the lease. You mix up the dynamic of your contract, especially if you drafted it yourself. You're not going to word it properly. You're going to cause problems for yourself because inevitably there will be a default, and you won't be able to enforce it because you just screwed up your lease with conveyance language in it.
Yeah, that changed some years ago too, where the lease to own was harder for landlords to do. Eventually, they started kind of changing that up. I know we've always groups we run in. We've never done one ourselves because I've always heard, "Don't do it, don't do it. You're gonna
it's a beehive.
You're gonna make a mistake."
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, there are some predatory, people out there that know, these people are going to default. I'm going to take a big, deposit up front. They're going to default, and I'm going to evict them.
Yeah.
Well, what they don't know is that Chapter 5 of the Texas Property Code is written specifically to address these kinds of deals. And when these tenants, and they're not tenants, they're actually purchasers. When these purchasers get counsel, these guys get popped in the teeth.
Yeah.
And the penalties for the violations are immense. Yeah. And the litigation goes on, for a long time. And the people who benefit, of course, are the attorneys who are running these cases. That landlord who tried to make a quick buck ends up losing it. And sometimes that tenant ends up getting that property at a deep, deep discount. It's just, it doesn't work as cleanly as you think it would. And really, it's a predatory act. I tell landlords to stay away from stuff like that.
Well, Misty, we're going to leave here and go find ourselves a rent to own real fast. And we'll go and do a little research on that landlord. 10,000 down. That's, man, it's always those people. Misty and I talk about that. There's always somebody out there that just screws it up for everybody else. It could have been used, if used properly, it could have been helpful for a landlord. Yeah, a good tool for the landlord and for the tenant, or now purchaser, to be able to acquire a property that otherwise they may have struggled with, but they didn't.
The truth is, this mechanism already exists.
Yeah.
It's the way a bank sells property, right? You give a deed. They're the owner. You take on a deed of trust and a promissory note.
Yep.
If they don't do it, then you can go through a regular foreclosure. But what this contract for deed tries to do is tries to sidestep all of that. Yeah. It also tries to curve around the regulations in the law, and that's why it shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah. There's always those that really, what do you call it, leverage it out. It's just the bad actors. Yeah. Man. So So as far as, on the landlord side, what other things have you seen that like problems or issues that landlords come across that just, that they maybe don't pay attention to or whatnot?
So a lot of what happens, if somebody does a proper screening and they get a good tenant in, sometimes landlords buy into this idea that being a landlord is a passive endeavor. They say, oh, well, this is passive income and passive this and passive that. And they take that to heart so much that a year goes by, 2 years go by, 3 years. They haven't seen the property in 36 months. And then they're shocked at the end of the tenancy when they say, how did these tenants, they got a giraffe into the living room? And these are the kinds of things you would notice if you were just diligent, and ever so often, you came by and said, hey, I'm going to come do a little inspection. I'm going to check the AC. They didn't change the AC filter for 36 months. Yeah. And I always tell landlords, that's on you. You want to get after your tenants for that. Well, it was in the lease. They were supposed to change it regularly. Yeah, but you're the one who has to hold them to it. Mm-hmm. That's like telling a kid, well, you were supposed to behave, but the parent doesn't watch them, doesn't enforce anything, and then they turn out being a terrible teenager. Well, if you had watched them during that time when in development, this would not have resulted. You bear some responsibility here. Yeah. And so I tell landlords, don't be afraid to regularly, now you don't want to be there every month, right? I recommend at least twice a year. Mm-hmm. At month 3 and at month 9 of every year, go in and inspect. Say, hey, I just want to, hey, winter's coming. I want to make sure that furnace is looking good. Want to make sure the roof's not causing any problems. Want to make sure everybody's just doing great. I'm checking windows and floors and doors. And it's at that time that landlords are going to see the seeds of problems or major problems already, right? Yeah. If you go in at month 3 and you see a major problem, you got to deal with that. And that's somebody who's got to go, right? But you begin to see seeds of stuff. And when you come back 6 months later, if it has become worse, you want to cut that off. Don't wait for month 12. Cut it off sooner rather than later, and get ahead of the game by knowing the condition of your house. Don't be so passive that you just kind of set it and forget it, right? That's not good landlording.
Yeah, they need to be doing notes instead, investing in notes instead of be on the other side of it, be on the bank side to not have to be all passive. Misty, you do the write your initials on the AC filter. Yeah. And throw it back in, or throw a new one in, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is date initials, and you're like, ooh.
Last time it changed is I did it.
Like, man. Right, and so that should be an automatic default, right? It's like, look, I was here, and I'm not doing this for you. I did it as a courtesy. Please get this done. I'm going to give you a notice of default for not doing your proper maintenance in the 6 months that I've been gone. Yeah. But yeah, and so you catch a problem, you fix it, you address it, but you also enforce what the lease says, and don't let them slide on default. Mm-hmm. You got to call them on it, but also don't let your property be harmed because you're putting it all on the tenant to maintain. Landlords have the most responsibility when it comes to maintaining their property.
Yeah, yeah. So I got to ask about COVID, because I know, COVID, I'm sure, exploded you guys a lot just because of the situation and stuff. So things are getting back to, so kind of give us an idea of that. What did it look like pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, just out of curiosity? Because, obviously everybody was in like, oh my gosh, what's going on here?
So pre-COVID, things were rolling along pretty well. Most of, especially in Harris County, most of Harris County was very pro-landlord. Everything was just humming along nicely. Evictions were easy, right? It was that golden, like Scrooge McDuck swimming around in the gold coins. It was just that life was great. But when COVID hit, all of that stopped. The courts shut down, and it wasn't very long before the eviction moratorium set in. And all of a sudden, all of that dried up. And the sentiment changed so fast. I don't know how much media I was seeing of landlords, being attacked really for wanting to collect rent.
Yeah.
The public perception of the role of the landlord just flipped. And it turned from, this is a business transaction where a tenant agrees to pay X and the landlord allows you to stay in exchange for X. And it turned into, this is a right. We are entitled to stay here as a matter of right. And man, the landscape shifted for about a year and a half, where we were having to fight in court just to, remove people, because while the law was set up to protect the most vulnerable, man, everybody jumped in on that bandwagon.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. Didn't matter if they had zero effect from the pandemic, if they were still making exactly the same or more money than they were before, they were jumping on the bandwagon and saying, "Nah, I have a rent holiday. I don't have to pay, and you can't do anything about it." Nah, nah, nah. And there was so much of that going on where we had to, on numerous occasions, present evidence that we didn't have to present before of the tenant's ability to pay, but their lack of payment just because they misunderstood what the law said. And so a lot of what we were fighting was just correcting courts about, just where the law was limited and how it didn't really apply to everybody who was requesting that assistance. And yeah, for about a year and a half, there was a lot of fighting and, just dealing with, the law constantly changing. It felt like every month there was something new from the federal government or the state government or the county, and some cities even were just, making new edicts, some of which are still standing. Some of these provisions, still affect some communities in the state of Texas, and you just have to be wary of them.
Were the courts more sympathetic towards the tenants at that time, or were?
I think that there was a lot of that, yes, but then there was also the courts just not knowing. The federal government stepped in and said, "You can't do this." So part of it was that the court's hands were just tied.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the Supreme Court stepped in and said, "Nope, this whole thing is unconstitutional," which I had been saying for a year and a half, but none of the lower courts were really agreeing with me.
Yeah.
It took a case going all the way to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to say, "No, we got to shut this down. It's an overreach. This agency cannot make law where that law is designated for the states." And so things kind of came back to normal after that Supreme Court ruling, but there's still a bit of residue of that. And so post pandemic, and I say post pandemic, I realize there's still COVID going around, but post moratorium and really kind of the big mountain of the pandemic are all but gone. Now, we're dealing with, just very little of that. And it kind of feels like the courts are finally, their memories of what life used to be like is returning. And really the only thing right now that's, I would say, a big difference is half of the courts are still doing what we're doing now, is having trial on Zoom, which, I kind of like.
Huh. Man, so you
save you some time.
Yeah, dude.
It does.
Nice. You just log on, be there shortly, and all right, guys, you'll have a good day. I like that.
Yeah.
Did you? So I was when it hit, right? I'll never forget Misty and I just eating breakfast, talking about like, man, this is wild. We got really lucky. We weren't one of the landlords that had to go through all evictions and stuff or any of that. We got real lucky with the tenants. Everybody paid, no problems. But we were reading a lot of stories of different individuals. Like, but looking back, it's been it's been a while now. I was like, for sure, there's gonna have to be tons of foreclosures. This is gonna turn bad, and nothing popped the way we thought it was gonna be. So let me ask you, from your perspective and what you've seen and what you deal with, do you feel like we might be still headed towards where some of these are, things are gonna get offloaded, or maybe not necessarily foreclosure, but just more offloading of properties and stuff like that, kind of what you've come across with through everything you've done?
So, part of the reason that foreclosures didn't happen is because there was also a foreclosure moratorium.
Right.
And so I know in Harris County, it must have been about 8 months and there were 0 foreclosures that were allowed. So it wasn't even a matter of what the federal government was doing on its end, and with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac not allowed to foreclose on a good portion of loans. Local counties were just saying, nope, nobody's going to get together. It's a COVID risk. We don't want a whole bunch of people in the same building. And so, nope. And so I think those two factors, along with the huge influx of cash that came in, also from the federal government, really prevented an onslaught of foreclosures. And I too was one of those people who just said, there's going to be a wave of foreclosures, and that was actually going to do things for the economy that I think would have prevented what happened over the last 2 years, which is this huge spike in real estate value.
Mm-hmm.
I think if the foreclosures would have occurred the way they naturally would have occurred, there would have been more property on the market for purchase. And I think because of the volume of property that would have been on the market, the property that otherwise saw this huge boom from these inflated values, I don't think any of that would have happened.
Yeah.
I think that the market would have, fluctuated a little bit. Yeah, there would have been a lot of foreclosure sales, but I think, because the demand has been there.
Yeah.
I think that demand would have been met, and I don't think that there would have been any kind of economic collapse from it. Instead, what we've seen is the federal government kicked in a ton of money, and it inflated. So this inflation is a direct byproduct of that, and so now we're having to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so home buyers and investors like yourselves are stuck with higher interest and less inventory.
Yeah, we're seeing more stuff come online just on MLS. We're seeing more of it. Things are taking longer. I know, Misty, you're dealing with that now in some leases that you've got up. They're not leasing as fast as they were. I know you just
longer.
Yeah, you just had to drop
price reductions
and things like that, and it's kind of changed. Have you seen that in Harris County as well? As far as,
you're talking in terms of the values of rentals?
Yeah, are you kind of seeing some of the, because things are things kind of going back to normal a little bit, or kind of what it was?
I'll tell you, it's still pretty competitive here. Maybe the value of home sales is not still on that upward tick.
Mm-hmm.
But the demand is still super high, and so houses are still being sold fast. There's still a high demand for rental, so I haven't seen rental values go down.
Yeah,
and I have a feeling that come January they're going to stay pretty high because those tax rolls are going to come out, and landlords are going to have a heftier tax bill than they've had before, and that's going to mean the need to increase rent.
Yeah.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of backtrack here, because you had mentioned something about, you talked about, there are still some of the laws that are in effect from the federal government from COVID. Can you kind of go through those, some of the things that are still, were left behind, so to say?
Right. Well, so I would say that among the lingering things is in the Texas Supreme Court still has a standing order to allow, number one, Zoom trials, which is not common, but may become common. The other thing is the issues of rent relief. So there are still programs out there. There's still some money out there for rent relief. And what happens is sometimes, and this was definitely more the case about a year ago and before, because of the rent relief rules, a tenant could request rent relief and essentially get their eviction abated, whether they were eligible for it or not. Some courts have gotten better at reading precisely what the Supreme Court has said, because what the emergency order says is both the landlord and the tenant must be in agreement and seek out these rent relief funds. Mm-hmm. That if only one does it, it's not enough. But early on, when courts were still trying to figure this out, a tenant would say, "Ooh, rent relief," and they'd buy themselves 60 extra days, even when the landlord was saying they're not eligible for rent relief, or even if they are eligible, I want to sell my property. I don't want to lease to them anymore. I won't accept rent relief. Mm-hmm. And so we're dealing with that on a lesser level now, but there are still instances of tenants waving the rent relief flag. And what I tell landlords is, look, it's a gamble. If you accept rent relief, you got to keep what could be a really bad tenant. So you have to decide, is that money worth keeping, essentially just kicking this problem down the road? And many of them are saying it's just not worth it. I would prefer to recover possession, put a better tenant in there than to accept rent relief and keep this bad tenant. And so the rent relief issues and the kind of sticky situations that are caused by them, that's one of the lingering factors that landlords have to consider. But again, judges are getting better at reading the rules and requiring that both landlord and tenant are on board for rent relief before they're stopping an eviction in its tracks.
Yeah, are you hoping they don't get rid of the Zoom? Keep that? Like,
get rid of the rest of the stuff. Especially going to trials across the state. This morning, my associate attorney had a trial in Dallas County, and he never left Houston. Yeah. Right, so it's nice to be able to attend stuff like that via Zoom, and without having to hop on a plane.
Yeah, it grows business. Yeah,
it does. Yeah, it grows my reach. I'm able to help. Now we have ways around it when we do have to show up in person. We can have local counsel up here, but I like for our attorneys, to be there in person. They're the ones you've talked to from the beginning, and they're the ones who know your case best. So that's always our preference if we can do it.
Yeah. So I got a question. This is not landlord question, but I know you guys practice other stuff as well. So you've got things you guys do debt. You deal with HOA and tax, right?
Yeah.
Can you go through that a little bit? Kind of some of the stuff, so, people who maybe don't pay their taxes, or maybe those situations where they can get their property foreclosed on for not paying taxes or HOA.
Yeah, I get a lot of people who come to me shocked, and they'll say something like, well, I know they can't foreclose on me because my mortgage is current. Mm-hmm. And you sit them down and say, the mortgage company is just one of the entities that can foreclose. You live in an HOA, you are subject to taxes. Mm-hmm. And you remember when you had that roofer come in and put that roof, they put a materialman's lien on your house. You stop paying that bill, they can foreclose. So, people are just not aware of the encumbrances that they have in their property and what those encumbrances mean. And so, I got a little behind on my HOA assessments. It's no big deal. Again, my mortgage is current. They can't foreclose. And they just misunderstand what the law says about these things. And so you have to educate them and tell them, yes, they can foreclose. You can lose title to your property if you don't pay these assessments. Please pay them. And so we help, clients who come in to, number one, understand, the consequences of what non-payment looks like, whether it's taxes or HOA assessments. And then we help to get them back on their feet. We enter into a plan usually with the county or the homeowners association to get the debt paid and to prevent any kind of foreclosure, because sometimes people don't know, and they'll let a case just go to default judgment because in their mind, they're convinced there's no way they can be foreclosed. And sure enough, a default judgment hits and a notice of foreclosure comes and their house is foreclosed, and now they've got a big problem. Yeah. Now, fortunately, where an HOA is concerned, you have a right to redeem it, and you can come back later, pay more fees than you were otherwise required to pay, and pay it faster. But there is a right of redemption for both HOA and tax cases. But why go through all that? Why make a mountain of fees when you can take care of it and then not get a foreclosure on your record? It just doesn't make any sense.
Do you find more people end up in that situation with HOAs, or HOAs less than they do not paying their taxes, or is it kind of equal? You see,
it's about equal. It's about equal. I think it's easier for HOAs to assess these kinds of things, but I think it's also easier for HOAs to work out. I think most people know, hey, I got to do this. But yeah, I mean, we look at these tax cases and HOA cases that come through the county, and yeah, it's about even.
Yeah,
about 50-50.
Any other areas you guys practice? I know debt was one of them as well. Is any other?
Yeah, we handle some consumer and commercial debt. So sometimes we represent businesses who kind of get into trouble with notes, or with other companies that they've purchased things from and just can't pay it back. And so we help businesses and individuals to some degree, but mostly companies who run into debt issues with debt collectors, and we will likely, they'll come to us because they're being sued.
Yeah.
We'll work out through the litigation some settlement that sometimes results in a judgment, sometimes doesn't. But our goal is always to resolve the debt in a way that makes business sense for that company to either, get back on their feet or to, kind of close down and just, take care of a debt and just wind down the business. But mostly our goal is to, put businesses in a position where they can continue to operate, but take care of a debt in a way that isn't going to choke off their business.
Yeah. You guys deal with any commercial landlords at all, or mainly just kind of, is it a lot of residential, or if you focus on residential, or do you guys have a couple commercial clients, or is it a different world, or what does that look like?
It is a different world. We are predominantly residential. I'd say about 80% of what we do is residential. The other 20% is commercial, and we represent, again, landlords and tenants on commercial leases with different issues that pop up. The rules are definitely different. A commercial landlord has all sorts of extra rights that are just not available to a residential landlord. I mean, you can come in with a chain and whoop, and a lockout is a lot easier for a commercial landlord. But and the eviction process is also limited. In a commercial eviction, you get one appeal and that's it. And so if for whatever reason you're unable to resolve things in the justice court or with a lockout, yeah, technically a commercial tenant can appeal one time, but that's it. After that, they don't get anything more. What residential landlords don't know is you could appeal a second and a third time. And I've got some cases where, yeah, the tenant did appeal all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court. And so those can be messy.
So with commercial, there's just they have more, is the buyer beware pretty much. It's the, hey, you have a lot more leeway as the landlord. It's more towards the landlord, right? I mean, it's geared towards them.
Oh, yeah.
Than it is residential. Whereas residential, you're pretty much at the mercy, or not the mercy, but it's geared towards the tenant a little bit more. They have more rights, I would say. Is that right?
You would think so.
No?
From your perspective.
Yeah.
But the truth is, the Texas Property Code, Chapter 92, 24, 91, and 93, all of these sections of the code are actually written in favor of landlords for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are strict procedures that a tenant has to follow. And I think that's where we kind of have a disconnect, because the truth is most tenants don't know how to follow these procedures. Right. And because they don't, the cumbersome nature of these procedures means most of them never get any benefit from them. So even where you see, oh man, look at all this and this and this and this that a tenant could get, 99% of them who try fail because they just don't know how to use these rights. Yeah. And so I would say that the law is still slanted very much. It was written probably by attorneys who represent landlords. It wasn't written by attorneys who likely represent tenants. There are tenant protections,
right?
But to say that the law leans toward the tenant, not in Texas. To see that kind of stuff, and I tell landlords this all the time, take a look at what's happening in California. Take a look at what's happening with rent control in New York. Those things don't happen in Texas.
Right. Those are lean towards it, but there's more protections versus the commercial. Yeah. You can come in, like you said, you just put a chain around it. And
that's different. Yeah. And the truth is, Texas is very big on property owners and mm-hmm. property ownership. And so, Texas law leans toward the owner. And that's what I tell landlords. You have lots of protections, but if you go outside of your obligation, you're gonna take a few, right? If you step outside the boundaries, if you get called on it. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, most landlords actually don't get called on those infractions. But when you do, man, it stings. And then you feel like, man, this is so unfair. I can't believe it. Well, if you've been paying attention, this wouldn't have happened. If you just follow the rules that are mostly written in your favor, this wouldn't have happened. And so I try to, tell landlords, keep your chin up. Things are pretty good for you. Yeah. I promise.
Any crazy commercial stories at all? Some stuff you've come across?
So
you're like, that was a wild one.
Let's see, I can't talk about the craziest one because it's actually the one that's right now in front of us. Well, it's headed toward the Supreme Court.
So we'll ask you that one later, right?
We'll talk about that one later. No, I don't have a lot of, usually the commercial stuff is pretty vanilla, but this one case is just like a mess. Just a mess. And it's that way because of the informality of the agreement between the parties. The less formal you go, the messier it's going to be when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And so always sometimes the best leases and the worst leases are in commercial, right? You see that 45-page lease, somebody is, paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
You see a 2-page commercial lease and you're like, it hurts my head just thinking like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
But it happens.
They're like, man. So what let me ask this, what tips would you give? I know you give tons of tips, but just kind of on here with some of the individuals that watch or listen, like what tips would you give for landlords? A couple quick things they should.
Okay, so if you want to just kind of a spitfire kind of thing,
spitfire a few tips. Put a timer
definitely,
on it,
definitely you're going to want to screen every prospective tenant.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely the big four, I recommend going beyond this, but the big four, credit history, criminal history, rental history, and employment. If you're not looking and checking these four, you're already sabotaging yourself. I don't know how many times landlords come to me well after the fact and say, oh, those pay stubs they showed me? They were all fake. Mm-hmm. People can fake all sorts of stuff. If you're not doing your due diligence and screening, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So that's one. Two is have a plan for when things go wrong. I tell people you need an action plan for non-payment. You need an action plan for when things get broken. You need an action plan for how you want to end the lease. If you don't plan for these things, which happen every single time, there isn't a single lease that's going to last forever, not one. So if you don't have a plan for the end, if you don't have a plan for stuff breaking in the middle, and you don't have a plan for default, you're just not thinking well enough about the things that happen all the time. Have a plan in place. How are you going to deal with these things going through? And then the third one is inspect. Routinely go and check in on your property. Make sure you are there. And make sure you know what to look for in terms of, the flooring, the walls, the roof, the AC and heat. Check out the plumbing, check out the toilets. Routinely check these things out, because if little problems start poking their head, little problems easily turn into big problems. And if you're there on a regular basis, your baby is protected. If you're not taking care of your property like a baby, you're going to lose money.
Yeah,
you're going to lose money.
Yeah.
And then finally, when it comes to eviction, don't wait. Too many landlords wait. They're like, well, okay, they're having a hard time this month. I'm going to let it slide. If you go more than 30 days without collecting rent, you are inevitably creating a snowball for this tenant. And non-payment of rent begets non-payment of rent. And so what you're going to find is that at a certain point, I say 7 days. At 7 days, you send a notice to vacate. And if they're still there, you begin the eviction process. Because we know that if they're going to leave, it's going to happen within 30 days. If they're digging their heels in and they're going to stay, you're going to see that within the first 30 days. So if you start your eviction process sooner rather than later, they might fix things, pay everything they owe, and it's a once in a lifetime sort of event for them. But that's not the case 99% of the time. If you're seeing trouble like non-payment of rent, you have to act fast. Don't sit on your hands.
You think it's a sympathy? Is that you think it's sympathy that makes them?
Yeah, make a business decision. Have a deadline in place. I am going to evict, or at least start the eviction process. And if they can come and make up for all of their sins, right? Then there I am. I'm mixing metaphors, right? Not sins, defaults, right? If they can come in and cure all their defaults, that's when it's better, right? So don't look at it in terms of morality. Don't look at it in terms of being nice. It's got to be about consistency and clarity with your business management, and you'll be fine.
Do you see a lot of people getting stuck by accepting partial payments in those type
That's
of
another one. Partial payment is as bad as non-payment, because it's essentially the tenant saying, I cannot comply with my promise. And we know that the best indication of future behavior is past behavior. And if they're showing you this is what they're doing now, they're likely going to do it again. It's going to be a problem, because a month is only 30, 31 days, right? If they've got a layoff or a death in the family, or some big life, a major illness, some big life altering thing, that's going to go beyond 30 days, this problem is going to resurface in month 2 and likely in 3 and 4. You have to take decisive action to say this business arrangement is not tenable, right? Maybe it was before this incident, but it is no longer tenable, and I got to make a change for my business's benefit, and stop saying, well, I have to be a charity for my tenant. That's not part of the deal.
Something I like that I think, and Misty, I was like, hey, Misty, what questions do you have for Ernie when we talk? And she's like, you need to ask him about the Facebook group. Because to me, that's one of those, I like it. It's a great resource. There's a lot of, I'm sure, you start looking as a landlord that you're like, I'm not alone. And you see other people's situations and stuff, so what made you, is that kind of what made you guys get that started as well? Obviously, business and stuff, but just kind of, because there's not a lot of stuff out there that's like that. Usually it's an investment group. It's,
Right.
learn to invest, things like that. But you've taken a whole nother angle of like, hey, this is the stuff that you see in the investment groups of like the horror stories, and then all the investors throw in their own 2 cents, but it's not really, they only have their 2 cents. But then you have a group that's geared towards just taxes and just landlords.
Yeah, and it's really helpful because you'll see landlords going out and doing their best and advising their best, and so we have a crew of people who monitor the comments, because we also want to make sure that the things that are being said line up with the law. And sometimes landlords will give bad advice, and I got to chime in and say, whoop, actually I would say that such and such is the better option, because the law limits you in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happened, which is awesome, over the last year or two, is now I can hear other landlords chiming in with something that I said, or they'll say, hey, Ernie's got a video on that. Let me put a link to that video for you. And it's like, oh, well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just me, it's not just my staff catching these things, but now these landlords are learning from me and now learning from each other. And it just makes the group so dynamic and so rich that the things that are being said are the things that I would say anyway. And so I just give stuff like that a like and say, yep, that's what I would say.
Going back to your teacher roots.
Yeah.
You're teaching Texas.
Yeah. You're making better landlords is what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's just, that's part of clarity, right? So part of clarity is us clearly understanding the law and our obligations. And when we do, we can clearly enforce our agreements with our tenants. And I know that many of the errors that are committed by landlords are just from lack of misunderstanding, lack of experience. And so hopefully, by participating in this Facebook group, they're gaining the kind of experience that's going to make them, from kind of amateur, or what I refer to as the hobbyist landlord, to a professional landlord.
Right.
That professional landlord functions on a different level.
Yeah. You're teaching landlords. You're teaching them how to do things right versus just. I know. I mean, I look back. I'm like, when we started, there was nothing. I mean, I know it was 2010 when we started investing, and we just started off with a single family home, and it was her house, and you just kind of learned on the fly. We hired a property management company, and after a while, you're like, all right, this looks easy. I think I can do this, and you're learning and learning and learning, and then eventually, but you learn just by doing. But you're, there now you have which I think is awesome. You have a resource for landlords, because these guys that are coming in now, 12 years later, from when we started, they actually can stop and, okay, we can learn something. We couldn't just look that up. We had to, hope we were doing the right thing, or ask the property management company and hope they're doing the right thing. And, and so.
That's another thing. You put so much trust in these property management companies, and sometimes they're not very good. I've had landlords come and say, well, here's the notice that my property manager sent. I'm like, that might work in Pennsylvania, but that doesn't work in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they would send this notice. And so, sometimes even property managers get things wrong because they, again, misunderstand, or they lack experience with this particular area of the law. They might be, they might be batting, pretty well otherwise, but in this area, they miss the boat. And, nobody's perfect. I don't even say that I have a perfect understanding of the law. I stopped myself because I was like, could I say that? No, definitely I can't. Nobody has a full understanding of the law because it constantly changes.
Right.
And if it isn't, the state legislature changing it, if it isn't the Supreme Court changing it, if it isn't local judges, giving their opinions and saying, no, I think it should go this way instead of that. It's the implementation of the landlord and that lease. How does this create another wrinkle? And so it's not as simple as, well, I've always done this and it'll always be that way. That's just not the way the law functions. And so it helps to have, a group of landlords who've seen it and seen it failed, and then, somebody, who kind of boots on the ground, sees it in the courtrooms and knows what people are fighting for and against. And so, I'll tell you that one of the most amazing things that's happened is that group has made me a better attorney. Yep. Because I'll see things like, hey, what do you do in this situation? And I'll be like, I honestly don't know. And so it makes me go and research and find out what would I do and what does the law say about that? And so, from time to time I get stumped, and it's nice to go and say, you know what, Ernie, you don't know everything. Go and ask questions yourself, and then share that with the group.
Isn't that awesome? You're practicing law is what you're doing. It's not. That's why they call it practice, right? Because you're always having to learn. You're always having to grow. It's never going to be 100%. That's
it's never done. It's never done. And that's precisely why I have work, right? Because it's constantly changing, and nobody can keep up with all of the changes all the time. And so if you got someone who's constantly watching it, they serve as a resource. And that's what I want to be to landlords is you work on the landlording stuff. I'll focus on the law, and then we'll meet together and see how we can help each other out.
I want to ask about property management real quick, because I know, like, do you come across where it's just like, I don't want to say bad property management companies, but do you come across a lot of situations where it's not a landlord doing it on their own, but they're like, I'm dealing with this property management company and they're doing it and we're not getting anywhere. I need help. Do you come across that a lot?
I'll tell you, the most problematic property management situations that I've seen are the ones where there's poor communication between the property manager and the owner. Because I've seen it more than once where the owner's like, I honestly don't know what's going on with my property. Or I didn't know what went on and then mess. And so I fired them and now I'm coming to you. And it's a common theme. If the property manager is not communicating well, that's probably the source of your problem. And it could be just they're bad business people. It could be they really just don't know. And for whatever reason, they're hiding the ball from you, the client, and just hoping the problem will go away. I've never understood that. I know when things go wrong in my business and I screw up, I tell the staff this all the time. I said, you're better off going to the client and telling them, we screwed up, but here's how we're going to fix it. Because I've never once had a client, when I've messed something up, tell me, Ernie, you're a terrible person.
Yeah.
It's always been, if you can fix it, let's do this. And I save more face coming to them and saying, look, I'm going to do this at a discount, or I'm going to do this work for free because we messed it up, and I'm going to take the blame for it. But I have a solution for you, and here's what I'd like to do. Not once have I had a client turn me away and say, no, I'm going to fire you now and go with somebody else. And so by being a good communicator, I think I've been able to help a lot more clients, even when things have gone wrong. And so property managers who haven't learned that skill end up making things far, far worse for their clients. And I think if owners just had it in mind, look, yes, I'm gonna hand the baton off to a property management company, but I want to be appraised of what's going on, especially when there's problems, especially when things go wrong.
Yeah,
that's got to be a must.
Well, you just went through a situation, Misty. What was yours? As you took over someone's property, they were.
Yeah, there was two tenants. It was a duplex, so two tenants that weren't paying and hadn't paid for 2 to 3 months.
But I mean, run through that. Like, what was the situation though? They called you to be like, hey, can you fix this?
Yeah, they had been managing the property for a few years. I guess everything was going pretty smoothly.
A different company, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't them. It was a different company managing it.
Yeah, until this situation popped up and the owner hadn't been receiving any funds. And I guess they put up the notice to vacate, but that's as far as it went.
It was like June.
Yeah.
That was in June, right?
Yeah, he still hadn't heard nothing, and so
You took it over.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just done with this company because I don't know what's going on.
But that was in June, and they contacted you in what, August?
Yeah,
to take over.
Yeah.
And then so they waited 2 months and they never filed for eviction. The property management company didn't file for eviction. They didn't do anything to try to actually get them out. They were just like, we'll put a note. I hope it happens.
Yeah.
And so,
and unfortunately, that's that failure to plan. Like if you know what happens at default, and then you have to decide at a certain point when eviction happens. If you don't have a plan for eviction,
yeah.
I mean, there are some tenants who know the eviction rules and know if I haven't been called to court, I can't be forced out. If I don't see a writ of possession, I can't be forced out.
Yeah. Well, you actually, so you took it over in less than 30 days, in like a couple of weeks. As soon as you got it, you had to figure out what was going on. It took you a very short time. Though you you went through the process to notice everything, and then next thing you know,
it's turned around.
It's turned around, but it's just somebody didn't take. Property management company just didn't take action. That's what we hear just on our end with if we take over someone's property, it's because they otherwise.
Lack of communication.
The other company didn't communicate. And I know that's why we fired several, we've fired, a couple of property management companies in our years and before we took over to our own because of that alone, that lack of communication. So
surprise bills or lack of communication.
The surprise bills, man, especially as an investor, those surprise bills will get you every time. You're like, wait a minute, hold on. I didn't pay.
You spent what on what? I didn't even know there was a problem.
Yeah.
Right. That I didn't even know. That's the stinger, right? If I know about it, I have no problem paying for stuff that I know about. It's the surprise that comes from lack of communication.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, and really, owners don't even consider it until they're neck deep in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. They don't consider the issue. I haven't heard from my property manager in 8 months. I wonder if anything's going wrong. I also look at my bank account and there's $0 in it.
Yeah.
Oh well, it's that passive income that you can't.
Yeah.
Even if you hire a property manager, you cannot be that passive. You just can't. You have to be diligent.
Yeah, you'll get hosed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, man, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up? It's been a great time talking with you. Anything you want to share, or
No, I kind of feel like I just spilled all my guts all over. I was like I'm even 10 pounds lighter.
It's therapy, man. It's landlord therapy.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. No, I think this is great. I appreciate you inviting me here, and I've had a blast.
And can you give us your contact info? How everybody reach you? I know Facebook group, kind of go through that. So anybody that listens to this, it's whether on YouTube or iTunes or Spotify, and they're like, man, I want to either get involved or with the Facebook group, use resource, and then of course, obviously if they hopefully need your services as well, how do they get in contact with you?
So if we have a landlord out there who is on Facebook and you're interested in joining over about 3,000 members in our Facebook group, we are Texas Landlords on Facebook. You can request entrance and our staff will look you over. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask you because we heavily screen our members, and we want to keep out tenants. We want to keep out people who are not serious landlords or investors. But if that's you and you want to join, hit us up. We'll be glad to welcome you into the group. That's Texas Landlords on Facebook. And so if you're interested in any way working with the law office of Ernie Garcia, you can send us an email at info@attorneyeg.com, info@attorneyeg.com, info@attorneyeg.com. And whatever we can do to help, we're happy to do it. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Awesome, man. Well, Ernie, we'll see you on Facebook, my friend. And thank you for joining us, and much appreciated.
Thanks for the
Absolutely,
time.
Christopher. It was great. Yeah, I had a blast, and maybe we'll do this again later.
Yes, sir. We got after when the Supreme Court goes through that, we got to hear about that.
Sounds awesome.
Thank you, Ernie. Have a good one.
Bye.
Yep. Bye.